I have a slide here to help describe these new investments coming online. At the bottom of this structure, you'll see infrastructure, a Wellcome Trust investment of £45 million. That will focus on an enabling infrastructure that will make it much easier to generate suites of living evidence syntheses on the big issues of our time. There are 5 dimensions of that infrastructure, and there's already an additional investment that has come online from the Wellcome Trust to specifically support the safe and responsible use of artificial intelligence. The other funding announcement came from UK Research and Innovation with an investment of £11.5 million, and that will be an initiative that funds a set of living evidence syntheses about accelerating progress towards the SDGs. That investment comes alongside some current and future investments, again from the Wellcome Trust in some areas where they're actively working. But Wellcome Trust and UKRI are now inviting other funders to come to the table to support additional suites of living evidence syntheses on the big questions of our time, but also to identify ways to better serve up actionable insights for different types of decision makers, including citizens, as well as different sectors, regions, and languages. So very exciting time to be working in this space with this new game-changing investments coming online. Living evidence synthesis is a continuously updated summary of what we've learned from around the world and how it varies by groups and contexts. So the old model of a one-off evidence synthesis would go out and try and find every study in the world, select those that address the question, assess the quality or the risk of bias of those studies, and then come up with a synthesis of what we know. With living evidence syntheses, the moment that new studies are released, they are immediately incorporated into this continuously updated summary. That means that anytime we need the evidence, we can go to the living evidence synthesis and see that updated summary of what we know and how it varies by groups and contexts. So a real game changer in terms of the updatedness of our understanding of what's known.
So I'm Maureen Smith. I live in Canada. I was honored to be one of 3 citizens who are part of the Global Commission on Evidence and now lead the citizen engagement group of its implementation council. And this is a very exciting time. It's a different time. The world has changed in the last 5 years. Maybe 5 years ago, most citizens didn't know what evidence synthesis was. Probably knew what evidence was, but not necessarily evidence synthesis. And the pandemic, being a global health threat, shone a very bright light on evidence synthesis and what happens when we don't synthesize evidence and we use, perhaps one study to make decisions. So first of all, there's a lot of awareness, and that announcement, though it seems like it's all about infrastructure and setting it up, we are now part of that infrastructure. So it is a very exciting time for us. People around the world, are asking to be involved in the synthesis of evidence. We've heard it from everywhere. Last year, we hosted a webinar series, five different webinars. It just wrapped up the last one last week from all around the globe, where we had thousands of people attending, and we heard of best practices, and we heard of the desire to be involved in evidence, whether it be storytelling from Africa or incredible websites in South America where people can put their questions forward. And though we have to contextualize everything that we do because we're, it's global work, there's a common thread that runs through it. And, WHO has guidance on citizen engagement, that the way that we operated before, which was a very niche, ecosystem that produced evidence and then packaged it and gave it to us and said, now use it, no longer works. And that people want to be involved and want to, and that's part of that is because of the misinformation that's arisen out, in the last, I'll say 5 years, and the trust in evidence. And so this funding announcement is really for everyone, because we know now that we have to work in a different way. and that the Evidence Commission, by having their third goal be the use of evidence in everyday life, rang that warning bell very, very strongly, that this was the way that things had to progress in that world. So I'm very excited about it. I think there's hope for the future, and there's lots of coming together, lots of synergies from across the globe, and the ability to want to share best practices and not to duplicate work.
I'm going to pull up a slide again to illustrate what I'm speaking about, because I do think citizens need to be front and center, both as users of this infrastructure that is being built, but also active participants with other groups that are using it. So I'll just direct your attention to the box on the right-hand side initially. Partway down on the right, you'll see citizen and community engagement initiatives. And we do need to think about putting evidence at the center of everyday life as a focus for all of this. So how do we make this global evidence, what's been learned from around the world, how it varies by groups and contexts, how do we get that into the hands of everyday citizens and communities so that they can use it in their own decision making? But these citizens and community leaders are also involved in advisory and decision-making processes within their country or their province or state. They're also involved in learning and improvement platforms like quality councils and so on. So they also play a role there. On the left-hand side, you'll see how we're talking about the different interest holders, or some people may say stakeholders, that need to be engaged in this collective effort. And in the short run, two of those groups are going to be really focused on actively engaging citizen leaders like Maureen. In the lower left corner, you see the Building a Global Evidence Synthesis community. So this is a bringing together of the different evidence synthesis groups. Maureen is involved in the Cochrane Consumers Group. So an example of an evidence synthesis network that puts citizens front and center in asking and answering questions with living evidence syntheses. And then in the top right corner, you'll see evidence intermediaries. And again, Maureen is an example of a citizen actively involved in national and subnational evidence support mechanisms, like the one that we happen to run at the McMaster Health Forum, and supports the bringing together of a pool of citizen partners who can jump in when a question comes in from governments or others, and where a timely demand-driven evidence response is needed. So those two groups are going to be engaging their citizen partners and asking them for their views about how do we need to shape this infrastructure, how do we make sure that these investments go in a direction that will create maximum value, both for the groups producing the evidence syntheses, but also the groups using them alongside the many forms of evidence that are needed to drive change on the ground at the more local level.
That's a really good question. I'm going to take it back to that goal number 3, which is the use of evidence in everyday life. And that means, there are many layers to that. It sounds very simple when you say it, but everyday life also means everyday people. So again, we don't want to create a group of, of people who are in there working. We're going to recreate the same thing if we don't include everybody. So you've got citizens who, told us at dialogues that we held that, well, I'm from an equity deserving group, and I can tell you how to package this so that people from my community will understand it and access the evidence in those living synthesis. And different citizens want to play different roles in it. Some want to sit at the table. Some don't want to sit. They want to work in the background. Some want to attend the group. Some want to just go to a focus group or go to a website and put the questions that they would like to see synthesized. And if we lose sight of that, that's where we're going to lose sight of the progress that we can make. And everyday life means everyday people. And I think that we understand that now, that we have to have a space for everybody to be involved in that system and in that ecosystem, and that people want to be involved in different ways. So I think it's really important to remember that at the end of the day, the goal is for, the right evidence at the right time for the right people. And that that's a collective effort, that no one has a monopoly over that, whether it be a citizen leader or whether it be, a world expert in evidence synthesis. We all have to work together. That's what the announcement kind of told me. Like, that was the message that I got, and that's the message I've been getting for the last couple of years, is really listening to that and saying we need to work in a different way, and listening to citizens talk about evidence. Again, much change in the last 5 years, is a real eye opener, and we need to be thinking about that all the time, because people are making decisions that are harming them based on not following the evidence, or on looking at little pieces of evidence and not synthesizing it. So, and I think the piece about the living, for citizens, that really resonates, because one of the things that we learned from the pandemic, and I'm hoping that citizens, were able to see in real time, was how evidence changes. And I think people are more aware of that. And when we talk about living evidence synthesis, I think people are saying, yes, we need to keep updating it. We need to keep changing, and we need to keep, training people to understand how science evolves. So I just see a lot of hope in that area, but always with everybody involved, and involved in different ways, depending on what role they would want to play in that system. And not, like I said, there are so many people who want to be involved, but they want to be involved in different ways. And I just think it's really important.
I guess my main message would be that we really need to put citizens front and center in these conversations as we build this new world together. If you go back to that image I showed, at the top, we need to be able to serve up the actionable insights from best evidence around the globe for everyday citizens. And that has to be a goal of this endeavor. And we need citizen partners to help us get that right. Second, as we produce these living evidence syntheses, we have to have citizens around the table asking the question, what are the big questions of our time? And then how do we synthesize the evidence with them at the table to make sure that the results are useful to people like them? And then finally, while citizens maybe many would not be as interested in the infrastructure conversations, my view is citizens need to be involved in shaping that infrastructure, because that includes things like, what are the processes through which citizens get to articulate what the big questions of our time is? So I think citizens have to be front and center in all pieces of this new global evidence architecture that's coming online. And I think it behooves us all to learn from the positive experiences of the past, and to try to put in place the pieces that worked well, and to address some of the missed opportunities that now we need to put front and center this time around.
4 words: show me the proof. I think we're going to have to do a really good job in showing how this money is being used, how it's making a difference, piece by piece. We don't have to wait years to show some proof. We need to show it pretty soon on at the beginning to get that trust. Unfortunately, a lot of trust has been lost. We need to regain that trust. We need to bring the prominence of evidence, based decision making back to the forefront, and a lot of that is done by concrete examples of what actually happened. And I think that the public, citizens, are clamoring for some proof that what we're doing is headed in the right direction, and as John said, includes them every step of the way. So we have all kinds of, we have implementation scientists who are that they're experts in implementing and in showing the proof, and we need to work with those people also, and get it out there and get the message out, because there's just so much hope in bringing that evidence synthesis community together, and including us in a community where historically we've basically been excluded, and we've been the recipients of the products. But now we want to be not only the recipients, what's extremely important, but also have a say in how those products are being produced and how the topics are being chosen. And I think this is a turning point for evidence synthesis. So for me, there's lots of hope. And I see it. I've been, since 2020, and I've seen a huge change in the last 4 years. So onward and forward.